Fact-free scaremongering is hardly new in American politics, of course. 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson's political opponents circulated leaflets warning that he was a godless heathen who would shutter the churches. But a case can certainly be made that governing in the 21st century is a far more daunting proposition, given the 24/7 digital news cycle, the instantaneous dissemination of truths and untruths, and all told, the ever-widening opportunities to use technology in the service of ideological polarization. So let's examine this talking point about 16,000 IRS agents as yet another Exhibit A. It all began on March 11th, when the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said in carefully hedged language that the preliminary cost estimates of health care reform, quote, would probably include an estimated $5 billion to $10 billion over 10 years for administrative costs at the Internal Revenue Service, end quote. Yes, this is me talking. Yes, that sounds like a lot of dough until you realize that our war in Iraq has cost us between $5 billion and $10 billion every month. Anyway, the Republicans on the House Ways and Means Committee took that CBO statement, dropped the word probably, and seized on the highest rough estimate, the $10 billion increase estimate for the IRS. Then they simply made the assumption that all this money, if in fact it would be needed, would be poured into hiring new IRS employees. Quote, this is factcheck.org noting this, without any allowance for desks, computers, office rent, utilities, travel, or other overhead expenses necessary to run any government enterprise, end quote. The GOP report on March 18th therefore concluded that, quote, IRS may need to hire as many as 16,500 additional auditors, agents, and other employees. Let's give those House Republicans a little credit on one thing. They hedged their own findings in a way, saying that the IRS may need to hire as many as 16,500 new people. But within hours on the conservative media, all these nuances were gone and the real falsities commenced. Various individual congressmen then sent out press releases declaring that 16,000 new IRS people, the number was suddenly cast in stone, would be hired to roam the land and make sure that every American was buying health insurance. By the next day, March 19th, all those new IRS workers had morphed into IRS agents. In reality, a small minority of the overall IRS workforce. Hence the headline that day on the blog sponsored by talk show host Laura Ingraham, quote, 16,500 more IRS agents needed to enforce Obamacare, end quote. It quickly got worse, of course. On March 21st, Republican Congressman Paul Ryan said on Fox News that the IRS would soon have, quote, 16,000 agents to police this new mandate, end quote. The following day, March 22nd, a host on the Fox Business Network talked about, quote, IRS goons, unquote, being put in charge of, quote, matters that involve the most personal choices we make regarding life and death, end quote. His guest, Republican Congressman Ron Paul, the former presidential candidate, upped the ante still further, warning about, quote, 16,500 armed bureaucrats, 16,500 thugs coming with their guns and putting you in jail, end quote. Fox promptly posted these remarks on YouTube, where they soon began to circulate as viral email. There were more such incidents, of course. On March 25th, Republican Senator John Ensign of Nevada, taking a break from his sex and payoff scandal, the one currently being investigated by the Justice Department, asked on the House floor, quote, do we want IRS agents showing up at people's houses, end quote. But let's pause for a moment to track this hyperbole. The CBO makes a rough preliminary cost estimate. A House Republican report takes the high-end preliminary estimate and comes up with a hedged worst-case scenario for new hires. Then the conservative media repeat the scenario and assume that all the IRS agents hires will be field agents. Then the field agents all become armed agents. In truth, only special agents, a separate category at the IRS, 3% of the workforce, are permitted to carry guns. And then all these armed field agents become demonized as goons and thugs with guns. It's difficult for the truth to play catch-up, but let's give it a quick try. Despite the claim of yet another Fox Business Network host, this time on March 23rd, that the IRS will hire 17,000 new agents and spend $10 billion so that they will check that you have the insurance you're supposed to have, end quote, the IRS's role in health reform is actually far more benign. For starters, its prime task this year, a task best carried out by the IRS desk jockeys, who comprise most of the workforce, will be to tell small business owners about the new tax credit that comes their way as a reward for contributing to their workers' health insurance. That's done mostly through letters and email communications and things like that.
And the drug coverage, isn't it?
Yes. And what about this rumor of 16,000 or 16,500 or 17,000 armed thugs banging on doors to enforce the health care mandate? IRS Commissioner Doug Shulman already shot that one down in sworn testimony on March 25th. When asked point blank whether IRS agents will be out in the field enforcing that mandate, he replied, no. This is a quote, no, it's probably worth me being very clear because I think there have been some misconceptions out there, end quote. Under the new law, he explained, the insurance companies will send out forms certifying that people have health coverage that meets the mandate, much the way lenders certify to the IRS the amount of interest that we pay on mortgages. In Shulman's words, quote, we expect to get a simple form that we won't look behind that says this person has acceptable health coverage. There are not going to be any discussions about health coverage with an IRS employee, end quote. And what about that Ron Paul line about the IRS sending people to jail? Well, the law itself waives criminal penalties for noncompliance. The law itself states, quote, such taxpayer shall not be subject to any criminal prosecution, end quote. Nobody is going to jail. All told, it would be nice if the world turned on the truth, but we know, of course, that the gut often trumps the intellect, and that fear often crowds out reason. Besides, it's now election season, when hyperbole is ascendant and partisan emotion runs high. But until Newt Gingrich or some other messenger surfaces anew to spook the public about an IRS health police, I'm just offering this modest corrective, and not for any partisan purpose, by the way, because as the late, great political columnist Lars Erik Nelson once said, the enemy isn't conservatism, the enemy isn't liberalism, the enemy is bullshit.